Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that Israel and Lebanon have agreed to extend the ceasefire by 3 weeks after talks at the White House on Thursday. He also said he's not considering using a nuclear weapon against Iran, adding he won't be rushed to end the war as Iran negotiations drag on. Iran says it has collected tolls from ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, with the first revenues already deposited into its central bank. This comes as Iran's leadership emphasized internal unity, while vowing retaliation against any aggressor. President Lee Jae-myung met with business leaders from South Korea and Vietnam in Hanoi during his state visit. He stressed the need to bolster cooperation with Vietnam on AI, semiconductors, and digital sectors. We begin this morning with the latest on the conflict in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced the extension of a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel by 3 weeks, following talks at the White House. He also ruled out using nuclear weapons against Iran and said he won't be rushed to end war as negotiations with Tehran drag on. Our Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday that he would not use a nuclear weapon in the war against Iran. Trump made the remark in answer to a reporter's question at an event focused on health care at the White House.
Why would I use a nuclear weapon when we've totally, in a very conventional way, decimated them without it? No, I wouldn't use it. A nuclear weapon should never be allowed to be used by anybody.
As for the ceasefire and the denuclearization talks, Trump said the U.S. has been continuing talks with Iran, but does not even know who is leading the country, saying they are in a state of confusion. When asked how long he is willing to wait until Iran submits a proposal for an agreement, Trump expressed his intention not to rush.
I want to make the best deal. I could make a deal right now. Do you know that if I left right now, we had a tremendous success? It would take them 20 years to rebuild, but I don't want to do that. I want to have it everlasting.
While saying the U.S. has total control of the Strait of Hormuz, he said it will open when the deal is made or something else happens that's very positive. To the possibility that Iran may have reinforced some of its military capabilities during the recent 2-week ceasefire period, he said they could have loaded up a bit during the hiatus. But even so, he claimed Washington would be able to knock any gains out in about 1 day. Meanwhile, the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel was extended by 3 weeks after a high-level meeting at the White House. This meeting was the second to take place in 9 days, following the first high-level talks between the sides in 33 years held earlier this month in Washington, D.C., mediated by the U.S. Secretary of State. Trump said he looked forward to hosting the two leaders of both sides in the near future.
And we think that the President of Lebanon and the Prime Minister of Israel over the next couple of weeks will be coming here. They've agreed to an additional 3 weeks of, no firing, ceasefire, no more firing.
He added that the U.S. will work with Lebanon to get things straightened out regarding Hezbollah. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Iran says it has begun collecting tolls from ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, with the first revenues already deposited into its central bank. The move comes as Tehran pushes to tighten control over the critical energy corridor, while emphasizing national unity amid rising regional tensions. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Iran says it has begun collecting tolls from ships transiting the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, marking a significant step in its effort to tighten control over one of the world's most important energy routes. Parliament Deputy Speaker Hamid Reza Haji Babai said Thursday that the first revenues from transit fees have already been deposited into the country's central bank. Another lawmaker, Ali Reza Salimi, confirmed that vessels are now being charged, though officials did not disclose how many ships have paid so far. Iranian authorities say the fees vary depending on cargo type, volume, and the level of risk posed by each vessel, with Tehran determining both the rates and collection system. The move follows earlier reports, including one by the Wall Street Journal, that Iran had ordered ships to arrange payments in advance through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, with transitions possibly made in cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan. Lawmakers have also been considering legislation that would formalize the toll system for ships passing through the narrow waterway. Amid the escalating tensions, Iran's leadership is also emphasizing internal unity. According to Iran's state-run IRNA news agency, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei said divisions among Iran's adversaries are widening, while the country's cohesion is growing stronger. He warned against what he described as foreign media efforts to undermine national stability. In a joint statement, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf stressed that Iran stands united, regardless of political differences, and vowed retaliation against any aggressor. Senior officials echoed that message, calling for solidarity under the leadership as regional tensions remain high and uncertainty continues over potential negotiations with the United States. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has met business leaders in Vietnam during his state visit with a key focus on energy security. The event was also attended by CEOs of major South Korean firms. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Business leaders from South Korea and Vietnam gathered together in Hanoi during the South Korean president's state visit. Attending the business forum on Thursday were about 500 business leaders, including South Korea's Choi Tae-won of SK Group, Lee Jae-yong of Samsung Electronics, Gu Kwang-mo of LG Group, and Shin Dong-bin of Lotte Group. Their Vietnamese counterparts included CEOs from energy firms, including Petro Vietnam's Le Nhac Son and Vietnam Electricity's Dang Hoa Anh.
오늘 이 자리에 모인 기업인 여러분이 양국 경제의 미래를 선도할 주축들이십니다.
President Lee Jae-myung stressed the need to bolster cooperation with Vietnam on AI, semiconductors, and digital sectors, for which South Korea will increase investment in production facilities. Another focal point was energy security amid the Middle East conflict, as well as cooperation on rare earths and urea solution.
지금 우리는 국제 경제 질서가 근본적으로 흔들리는 중대한 격변기의 중심을 지나고 있습니다. 30여 년 동안 쌓아온 양국의 변치 않은 우정이야말로 우리 앞에 닥친 복잡한 변화에 대응할 가장 확실한 답입니다.
Vietnam's Prime Minister Lee Minh-hung asked South Korea to expand investment in chips, AI, and clean energy, and asked for technology transfers.
The world is facing an era of great transition, of a fierce competition over reorganization of global supply chains and technology. Cooperation between Korea and Vietnam should be shifted towards quality growth.
The sentiment was echoed by business leaders.
Beyond expanding the size, we need a trade investment that yields a higher value, such as cutting-edge technology, service, and digital areas.
More than 70 business MOUs were signed for cooperation on advanced technology, infrastructure, and energy.
Hyundai Rotem signed a contract with Ho Chi Minh City to export urban trains for a metro railway project. Korea and Vietnam reaffirmed their best bilateral relationship through the reciprocal visit in such a short period of time.
The scale of the business delegation and presence of the CEOs of Korea's four major firms shows how important Korea views Vietnam, especially during this time of global trade uncertainties. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Hanoi.
South Korea's economy defied market expectations by posting its strongest quarterly growth in over 5 years in the first quarter of this year, despite geopolitical risks surrounding the conflict in the Middle East. For more, we're joined today by Professor Kim Yong-jin, professor at Seogang Business School. Professor Kim, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
So the nation's real gross domestic product grew by 1.7% from the previous quarter. What's behind this surprise growth, and what does this tell us about the current state of South Korea's economy?
Well, as you mentioned, South Korea's economy expanded by 1.7% in the first quarter of this year, which is, marking its fastest quarterly growth in 5.5 years. According to preliminary data from the Bank of Korea, the rebound was primarily fueled by four factors, including export boom, investment recovery, and stable consumption, and policy support. Korean export jumped, 5.1%, largely driven by, IT component like semiconductors for AI infrastructure. In general, IT sector has been experiencing weak demand in the first quarter of the year, but not in this year. We need to check, whether the trend will change in the future. In terms of investment recovery, facility investment surged 4.8%, while construction investment climbed 2.8%, ending a long period of contraction in the sector. Private consumption also rose 0.5%, supported by improved household confidence and spending on goods. Lastly, I believe the large portion of the economic expansion of Korea in the first quarter is attributed to policy support. Government measures, including capital market revitalization and fuel price cap, helped ease the impact of energy cost.
I see. And SK Hynix yesterday reported a five-fold jump in quarterly operating profit, and that reached over $25 billion US. What's the significance of this, and how do you view some reports suggesting it still, failed to impress investors that are questioning how long this boom in AI memory chip sales can last?
Yeah. It is amazing to see SK Hynix, record-breaking first quarter result of this year, right? I believe it highlights its dominance in the AI-driven semiconductors market, even as, some investors remain cautious about the long-term sustainability of this super cycle. The jump in operating profit of SK Hynix to 37.6 trillion won, which is approximately 25 billion US, is a milestone for both the company and the broader industry. The company achieved a record high 72% operating margin, which is great, right? Surpassing the profitability of major competitors like Samsung Electronics and even the founder leader TSMC. As a primary supplier to NVIDIA, SK Hynix is capitalizing on the high demand for high bandwidth memory, which is essential for AI service. This has transitioned the memory sector from a traditional cyclical business to a core infrastructure style business. Despite the astronomical numbers to me, the stock reaction was relatively muted, rising only about 0.16% in the trade. The key reason is that the market anticipation was so high that even record results, barely met consensus. Some analysts, had projected operating profits, exceeding 40 trillion won, making the actual 37.6 trillion won feel like a slight miss to some. Moreover, quarterly revenue of 52.6 trillion won fell slightly below some analysts' forecast of 53.5 trillion won. The only matters is, analyst forecast, I guess. Even though there are some concerns about the AI sustainability among, investors, I believe the strong demand for memory chips will stay for a while, considering the industry transformation into digital and AI will make them, which will, make them just like infrastructure for any businesses.
I see. And I also want to ask you about the interest rates, because the U.S. Federal Reserve is set to decide on its key interest rate next Wednesday. How do you think this will play out, and how might this decision affect the Bank of Korea's policy direction?
Yeah, just like the majority of analysts, I expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to hold interest rate steady at the range of 3.5% to 3.75% at next Wednesday's meeting. Despite the strong GDP growth in early of this year, persistent inflation in a tight labor market suggests that the Fed is in no rush to pivot toward easing. Recent price indices, have remained above the 2% target, and making the Fed cautious about, cutting rate too soon and risking a resurgence of inflation. The U.S. economy has shown remarkable strength. As long as, growth remains solid and unemployment low, the Fed has the luxury of, keeping rate high to ensure price stability. In recent weeks, Fed officials, have moved from discussing when to cut to whether they need to cut at all in the first half of the year, emphasizing a higher for longer stance. The Fed decision leaves the Bank of Korea in a difficult catch-22 situation, which with the U.S. Holding rate high, the BOK cannot easily lower its own rate without risking capital flight and further won depreciation. The Korean won has also been under significant pressure recently, flirting with the 1,500 won per dollar, which is like the psychological barrier, right? A hawkish Fed prevent the BOK from providing domestic relief through a rate cut, as it must prioritize currency stability. A weak one makes energy and food import more expensive. Even if domestic demand slows, the BOK might be forced to keep rate high to prevent imported inflation from spiking. In sum, the Fed decision to stay put act as a policy anchor for South Korea, effectively locking the BOK into a restrictive stance regardless of domestic economic situation.
I see. All right, Professor Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
South Korea has recorded more than 2 million foreign patients seeking treatment in a single year, for the first time since tracking began in 2009. The Ministry of Health and Welfare released the 2025 data on Friday, showing patients from 201 countries visited Korea, with the largest numbers coming from China, Japan, Taiwan, the United States, and Thailand. The number had dropped to around 110,000 during the COVID-19 pandemic, but has since rebounded sharply, doubling each year from 2023 and setting new records for 3 consecutive years. Dermatology accounted for the biggest share at 62.9%, or about 1.31 million patients, followed by plastic surgery at 11.2%, underscoring a strong concentration in cosmetic procedures. Amid the Middle East crisis, Koreans panic-bought trash bags over fears that naphtha shortages would hit production of this essential item. Though the situation has since calmed down, it hinted at the need to transition into recycling and reusing trash bags. Our An Sung-jin was out and about.
The ongoing situation in the Middle East has had unexpected effects here at home in Korea, one of them being supplies of trash bags selling out. Nearly 2 months into the conflict, I visited local supermarkets to see how the supply situation is unfolding on the ground. While trash bags are now available in more places, including this residential area in Seoul, the once easy-to-come-by items sparked panic buying at one point. Some stores had once limited purchases to single rolls only, with customers coming in asking for stock buys.
Now we have enough, so there's no limit. But when people came to hoard trash bags, we had a set number.
This wasn't an isolated case.
Since the Middle East situation, the sales of trash bags have surged, especially compared to last year.
The one shortage traced back to disruptions in resource supply, as tensions in the Middle East strained global energy markets. And in times like these, alternatives for a more reliable future are no longer optional, but essential. For more than 20 years, this company in Gyeongsangnam-do province has been recycling plastic waste into trash bags. Today, with the naphtha shortage making the headlines, their once overlooked work is now in the spotlight. Discarded plastic from industrial packaging, greenhouse vinyl, and even agricultural waste like rice straw coverings all come together at this factory. Lee, an experienced veteran in the industry for around 40 years, would sort these raw recycled pellets and melt them to transform waste into new trash bags. Even the printed labels on the bags are designed with sustainability in mind, made from soluble ink that minimizes their environmental impact. The finished products are delivered to around 10 regions across the country, supporting local supply chains during a time of strain. For Yi, the work has never been about profit.
Recycling plastic this way is something that should have been done a long time ago. Now it feels like the world is finally catching up.
Lawmakers also stress their efforts to accelerate the transition to renewable energy.
The transition will require a more structured legislative and policy framework. We aim to expand into renewables by securing the necessary budget.
The global supply uncertainties continue. Small, steady efforts like these may prove to be a path toward a more resilient and sustainable future. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. The European Union on Thursday approved a $106 billion loan package for Ukraine. The breakthrough came after oil resumed flowing through a pipeline running through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. The pipeline had been turned off for nearly 3 months, which had led Hungary's now outgoing leader Viktor Orbán to hold the entire package hostage. Orbán's election defeat earlier this month removed the final obstacle. The package is aimed at keeping Ukraine's war economy functioning and its military supplied over the next 2 years. A United States Special Forces soldier who took part in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has been arrested after allegedly placing a $32,000 bet that Maduro would be removed from power. The soldier reportedly walked away with $400,000 in winnings. The trade drew the attention of law enforcement almost immediately. The soldier had opened the prediction market account in late December, just weeks before the U.S. military launched a covert overnight operation that pulled Maduro from the presidential palace in Caracas and transported him to New York to face federal drug trafficking charges. The medical data of 500,000 volunteers from one of Britain's most significant scientific databases has turned up listed for sale on the Chinese e-commerce platform Alibaba. Officials are calling it a serious breach of trust by rogue researchers. The UK government confirmed on Thursday that the data did not include names or addresses, but could contain gender, age, socioeconomic status, lifestyle habits, and biological samples. Alibaba has since removed the listing. Tech giant Meta has announced it is cutting 8,000 jobs. 1 in 10 of its employees face the chop as the social media giant redirects resources toward a massive artificial intelligence build-out that is pushing costs to record highs. The company told investors its expenses this year could climb as high as $169 billion, fueled by AI infrastructure and the salaries it is paying to attract top AI talent. The cuts, the company said, are about running leaner while making room for that investment.
We need to dress accordingly today. The morning began chilly, but by afternoon, it's going to feel more like early summer in many regions. Well, some of the inland regions even saw freezing morning temperatures, but highs will jump to the 20s there as well. Meanwhile, dry air is spreading to the west. A dry weather advisory is in place for the capital area now, and as you know, a tiny spark can become a major problem fast, so extra caution is needed outdoors. And under sunny skies, UV levels will be very high in most parts today. Make sure to have your sun protection items ready. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 26 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 25, Daegu at 21 degrees. Then air quality will be fairly clean nationwide today. Then the weekend stays bright and warm with those big day-to-night temperature swings continuing. Then late Monday into early Tuesday, rain is expected across the central regions.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.